Hey guys, instead of doing a PowerPoint presentation for chapter 4, I decided to just kind of walk you guys through this assessment process, this flowchart. It's really hard to identify kids with emotional behavior disorders. You have kids that emit problem behavior in the classroom that get referred for special ed that don't have EBD. And then you have those kids, like we talked about in the last couple of chapters, that have an emotional behavior disorder, but they have more of those internalizing behaviors, in which they're not emitting problem behavior and being disruptive in the classroom. So identifying kids just in general that have emotional behavior disorders that do actually need services, special ed services, can be really hard. So this assessment process is key. It's kind of this initial intervention that allows us to, identify and help kids that are struggling in the educational setting. So let's go through this spreadsheet, or this flowchart, sorry. So up at the top, we have a student that has academic and behavioral difficulties. So this is when a teacher who should kind of know their students starts to identify kids that are having difficulties. And then you go through screenings. So with screenings, you want to kind of identify any type of biological or sensory reason for these academic or behavioral difficulties. So for example, maybe there's a problem with their hearing, or a problem with their vision, or maybe there's a problem with their medication. So all of those are kind of things that we can fix very quickly, and the process will stop. If it's not due to some type of biological reason, if the problem behavior is not due to some type of a sensory reason or biological reason, then they might be at risk, then that child might be at risk for either a learning disability or having an emotional behavioral disorder. So then we go to the pre-referral intervention. And with the pre-referral intervention, it kind of has two main parts: accommodations and then the response to intervention. And with accommodation, at this point, the teacher can try to implement accommodations, and they don't have to be big accommodations. They should be really simple at this point. So, like your book suggests, moving the kid to the front of the classroom, giving them extra time on tests, things like that. Just really simple things that the teacher can do. And then we have this, the teacher can also let the report to the at-risk team. And this can be an actual team that is formed, or it can just be kind of your grade level team. You can also do the response to intervention. So this is this three-tier system of support. Tier one is kind of a universal intervention. So with Tier 1, typically the interventions that are implemented school-wide, or classroom-wide. It's basically when the teacher is screening for those problem behaviors. The next tier is Tier 2. So this becomes a little bit more specialized, and that you have kind of group interventions and things like that. So if Tier 1 is not successful with the child, then they go to Tier 2. And if Tier 2 is not successful, then they go up to Tier 3. And Tier 3 is that extensive, individualized support. Now, the general education teacher can typically do Tier 1 and Tier 2, and they might consult with a special ed teacher a little bit, but with Tier 3, that special ed teacher is really brought in to help to kind of help and collaborate with the general education teacher. And this Tier 3 is when you're going to look at the function of the behavior. You're going to develop your behavior intervention plan. You're going to be doing those direct observations and things like that. And so with these 3 tiers of support, you're really trying to figure out if the child is receiving adequate instruction in the general ed classroom. And with each of these interventions, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, there's a specific intervention for each one. So you're defining the problem, developing an intervention, running the intervention, tracking progress. If the kid is not making progress, you go in tier 1, you go to tier 2. There's an intervention for tier 2. You're defining the problem, developing the intervention, running it, tracking progress. If the kid's not successful, then they go to tier 3. And if they're not successful in tier 3, then they get referred for a comprehensive evaluation. And this is kind of that formal referral process. With the formal referral process, you have to have parent permission first. Oh, and before I talk about this, all these pre-referral interventions, make sure that they get documented. So you always want to document what you did. You're going to, like we talked about in the other lecture, be observing data and things like that. Your intervention that you're running, everything needs to be documented and accounted for, because when they do that formal referral, they're going to take all this into account in the comprehensive evaluation. So the student gets referred for a comprehensive evaluation. You have to inform, the parents have to give consent for the comprehensive evaluation, and it has to be a written consent. So it can't be verbal. And if the parent says no, then the process stops. And if the parent says yes, then the school has 60 days after the parent consent. And this does change by state. So some states require 45 days, but the IDEA requires 60 days. So parents say yes, and the school develops an evaluation team to conduct a comprehensive evaluation. So now let's go over here with the comprehensive evaluation. It includes the documentation of that pre-referral intervention. So like I said earlier, make sure that you guys are documenting everything with the pre-referral process. The parents have to give consent, like we already talked about it. You'll select an evaluation team. This is really similar to the IEP team, and that you have to make sure that you have qualified personnel to do this. It typically consists of that regular gen ed teacher, maybe a special ed teacher, school psychologists, counselors, parents, people like that. They're going to review existing background information. So they're going to review the screenings, all that pre-referral intervention stuff, the parent info, any type of social and developmental history, current assessment, observations, disciplinary documents, anything that they have on the kid up to this point, they're going to be reviewing. And then they're going to develop a plan for the evaluation. So they're going to figure out what else is needed for the evaluation. And then they're going to conduct the evaluation. And then they're going to compile the results, which are written. When they're conducting the evaluation, they typically need three different sections of evaluations. So they typically assess academic skills, the problem behaviors, and then social skills. And this is how they're doing it. So when they assess academic skills, they're going to be looking at just kind of your standard IQ tests and achievement tests. And your book lists a lot of IQ tests, so you guys can go back and look at them. You know, you got the Stanford-Binet intelligence scale, some nonverbal IQ tests and things like that. And then achievement tests, you know, you have your Peabody individual achievement test and things like that. So your book lists a lot of those, so you guys can go and read them. With behavior problems, you're going to do those rating scales, interviews, observations, and we talked about this in the other lecture for this week, so you guys can go back and look at that. And then they're also going to assess social skills. So you can do direct observations of social skills, just like you did for the behavior problems. And they also do some sociometrics measures. So this is when they're essentially going to, they ask the child's peer group. So they're really measuring the acceptance among peers for the child. Okay, after they compile the results, they're going to review the assessment results and determine eligibility. So they're looking at really two questions right here. They're looking at, does the child have a disability? So are they eligible? And do they need special ed services? If they do not have a disability and they do not need services, the procedure stops. If the student is eligible, so they do have a disability and they're eligible, but they don't need special education services, then both of these options can still be considered for Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So they still have the right to receive accommodations because they're protected under Section 504. If the student is eligible and needs special education services, then this team will start to develop the IEP. Of course, they have to have parent permission first. If the parent doesn't give permission, then says no, and the process stops. If the parent says yes, then the IEP team will develop the IEP and determine placement. The student will receive the special education services, and then annually the IEP team will conduct a review. If the kid still needs services, then we go back here and we go through this kind of whole circle again. And if the kid does not need services, then great, and the whole process stops. So that's just kind of an overview for you guys. And if you have any questions or anything like that, then please email me. All right, thanks guys.